All right, so this video is called Ohio Teen Assaulted 98-year-old Woman Dead Body in 2 hours Straight. And this one is Horror Case Files. Let's jump right into it.
This 98-year-old woman was about to be killed by the man who was recording this video. 3 days later, on April 9th, 2018, Howard Leisure nervously called the Ohio police, reporting his aunt, 98-year-old Margaret Douglas, missing.
Margaret police.
Yes, this is Howard Leisure. My aunt lives on Portage Street. A friend of ours stopped over there yesterday to check on her, and she was nowhere to be found.
Okay.
He says papers were on the porch for the last 3 days.
What's her name?
Margaret Douglas.
Did she live there by herself?
She lives there by herself, yes, and she never locks her house.
Police immediately launched a search. At nearly...
Do you guys lock your doors to your house? I think, depending on where you live, like California, you better lock your doors. I don't care what community you live in a nice neighborhood, bad neighborhood, lock your doors. I think each state is different. So like I'm out in Colorado now, so out here they don't, depending on where you at, they don't lock their doors like that. I do.
A century old, Margaret Douglas was considered highly vulnerable. Police started by combing through her house, calling her name, but silence was all they found. Expanding their efforts, police questioned neighbors and searched the surrounding area. The investigation revealed that Margaret was last seen alive at her house on April 5th, and her family hadn't heard from her since April 3rd, nearly a week before the search began. By the evening of April 9th, the search hadn't turned up anything. That's when Margaret's nephew Howard and his wife Cindy arrived to help. Since Margaret never had children of her own, her nieces and nephews took on the role of caring for her, like she was their own mother. They knew her routines well, the red wallet she always carried, the way she dressed when she stepped outside. Howard checked the closet and found clothes lay scattered on the floor. Digging through the pile, his hand brushed against something cold. It was Margaret's favorite shoes. As he tried to pick the shoe up, Howard uncovered what would haunt him for the rest of his life.
The shoe was still attached to Margaret, who was in the closet.
Margaret's lifeless body was forced inside the closet. The space was just 1.5 by 2.5 feet. She was wearing her nightgown, which was torn. Bruises covered her head, and marks on her neck suggested she had been strangled.
Margaret was positioned with her head down in the corner and her backside kind of up in the air. Her underpants were torn inside the closet there. Her nightgown was all unsnapped, and her bra was pulled up. I immediately thought that there was a sexual element to the crime.
I hope
But
not.
that wasn't all. Police found a jar of blackberry jam in the living room. It appeared to have been used, but not for food. Later tests revealed male DNA inside the jar. It had been used as a lubricant in a sexual assault.
Oh, wow.
Howard was devastated. He never thought his beloved aunt would die like this.
And I pretty much lost it. Something I'll never forget. I'm sorry. But to find her like that.
What kind of monster could do this to a 98-year-old woman?
98?
For what motive?
Doing that
Would he get a death penalty?
98?
Stay tuned to find out. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell. Now, let's get back to the case. Born on September 15, 1919, in Akron, Ohio, Margaret Douglas grew up with 2 sisters and a brother. By 2018, she had outlived all of them. Over her nearly 100 years, Margaret witnessed monumental changes in the world, from the Great Depression and World War II to the moon landing and fall of the Berlin Wall. She spent almost her life in Ohio, working at O'Neill's department store in Akron during her youth. The job suited her social nature, giving her the chance to meet many people and forge lasting friendships. After the war, Margaret married Donald Douglas, an Army veteran who worked for the Ohio Match Company. Together, they moved into their Wadsworth home, where they built a life filled with simple joys: traveling, watching Cleveland Indians games, and gardening. Though they never had children, their life was fulfilling. Donald passed away in 2000, but Margaret stayed in their home, finding comfort in familiar surroundings and a friendly neighborhood. Tragically, it was in that very house where her life was brutally taken. Forensics meticulously combed through the scene, gathering DNA and fingerprints. They tested the samples against Margaret's family members, but none matched. Whoever had done this was still unknown. Detectives began leaning toward the theory of a burglary gone wrong. Margaret's red wallet was missing, and while there were no signs of forced entry, it wasn't unusual. At 98, Margaret leaned on her support system. Her niece and nephew helped with the groceries, while her neighbors would often check on her. Margaret rarely locked her doors. She trusted those around her and never imagined anyone could wish her harm. The only other clue found at the scene was a discarded plastic glove lying in the backyard. To investigators, it hinted at chilling intent. The killer likely worn the glove to avoid leaving fingerprints or DNA, but in a hurried escape, they carelessly dropped it. This raised unsettling questions. Was Margaret specifically targeted? Had the crime been premeditated? Seeking answers, detectives turned to her family. They needed to know if anyone had a motive. Both Margaret's niece and nephew confirmed that she wasn't wealthy and hadn't written a will, so there was no financial incentive tied to her death. Moreover, Margaret wasn't the kind of person to make enemies. Her life had been long, quiet, and full of meaningful connections. In fact, her murder sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community. Everyone was on edge, desperate for answers. As police expanded their search, they discovered a pattern of recent car break-ins in the area. Small items, spare change, nothing significant. But something odd happened. Police quickly noticed a man loitering near Margaret's house, smoking a cigarette and watching the scene closely. It turned out to be David Klinkenbeard, Margaret's neighbor, who failed to return police's calls. Though he no longer lived in the neighborhood, he admitted he had been keeping an eye on the investigation, even conducting his own inquiries. This struck the police as strange. How did he know details that hadn't been made public, such as where Margaret's body had been found and what she was wearing? On April 11th, 2 days after Margaret's body was discovered, officers brought David Klinkenbeard in for questioning. He claimed to have last seen Margaret on April 4th, when he helped her bring in her trash cans. On April 8th, he went to her house again, but when she didn't answer the door, he assumed she wanted privacy. Before leaving, he greeted another neighbor. By that time, Margaret had already been dead. This timeline added to investigators' suspicions, but when they tested David's DNA against the sample from the glove found in the backyard, it didn't match. David was cleared. He wasn't the killer, just a worried friend trying to figure out what had happened. Despite ruling David out, investigators weren't entirely back to square one. They still had another potential lead, a string of car break-ins in the area. In particular, one incident caught their attention, an attempted carjacking that happened early in the morning on April 8th, the day before Margaret's body was found. The victim of the carjacking was a local man named Paul Shalod, a 50-year-old church worker known for his generosity. Paul told the police he was driving and saw a young man, who looked under 20, limping down the street, so he decided to stop and offer help. According to Paul, the moment he got out of the car, the young man suddenly lunged for the driver's seat and sped off with the vehicle.
Got him.
However, when police reviewed CCTV footage near the scene, they discovered a different version of events. The footage showed Paul talking to the young man through the passenger side window for several minutes before the man entered the car. A few minutes later, Paul exited the car, and the young man drove away. Crucially, the footage showed no sign of the young man limping, which made Paul's account suspicious. Confronted with the footage, Paul nervously admitted he had lied. He explained that he had met the young man through a hookup app, and didn't want his church to find out about it. According to Paul, they had agreed to meet, and things started consensually in his car. But during their encounter, the young man became aggressive, forced him out of the vehicle, and drove off. Unfortunately, this revelation didn't lead anywhere useful. The young man remained unidentified, and there was no evidence connecting him to Margaret's murder. Undeterred, investigators kept digging into local petty crime, hoping to uncover something unusual. On April 13th, 4 days after Margaret's body was discovered, they caught a break. Several reports came in about a disturbance in Margaret's neighborhood. In CCTV footages, police found two young men causing trouble, running around, stirring up mischief at the park, around the church, and breaking into cars. Around the same time, someone reported a break-in at a nearby construction site. During the break-in, one of the suspects had left a phone behind. The phone belonged to a young man named Zach, someone already familiar to law enforcement for minor crimes like theft and carjacking. But this time, it wasn't just petty theft. Zach was now a prime suspect in the murder of a 98-year-old woman. Police found Zach sleeping in his car in the parking lot of the local high school. They arrested Zach and brought him in for questioning. When confronted with the evidence linking him to the construction site break-in, he confessed to the crime but denied any involvement in Paul's carjacking. More importantly, he adamantly denied having anything to do with Margaret's murder. However, CCTV footage from April 13th didn't just show Zach. It also showed
Cameras be catching everything. That's what in this day and time, you can't do nothing. Everybody got a Ring camera. They got cameras all over the house. There's cameras everywhere.
Another person. Investigators pressed him harder, pointing out the mounting evidence and their suspicion that he might be involved in the killing of Margaret Douglas. Under pressure, Zach broke down and made a shocking admission. He confessed that he hadn't been working alone. He had an accomplice, someone who had masterminded their petty crimes, and someone who had done something far worse. His accomplice's name was Gavin Ramsey. Gavin, just 17 years old, had a troubled history. Born in March 2001, he was the second eldest of 4 boys. From a young age, Gavin displayed worrying behavior. He had been in and out of...
Is his name Gavin or Gavin? You give him 2 different names.
...counseling for a decade. At the age of 10, his psychologist reported disturbing incidents, including one where Gavin chased his siblings with knives, raising serious concerns that he might harm himself or others. Despite years of therapy, things hadn't improved. Now at 17, Gavin was drinking heavily, using drugs, and spiraling further out of control. His mother, desperate and exhausted, had tried everything to help him, but nothing seemed to make a difference. When police brought Gavin in for questioning, his mother accompanied him into the interrogation room. At first, officers focused on the petty thefts and break-ins. They asked him about his role in these minor crimes, building rapport and waiting for the right moment to bring up something more serious. Then police shifted the conversation to Paul's carjacking. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Gavin, who had been sitting casually until then, stiffened. His mother glanced nervously at him, sensing that something was wrong. Gavin hesitated, then looked at his mother. "Can I talk to them alone?" His mother nodded and left the room at his request. Once she was gone, Gavin admitted to setting up the meeting with Paul, not just to talk, but to get back at him. He said, "To find guys that are that low, it's karma. Like if you're going to do that, then I'm going to rob you." This revealed a dangerous, vengeful mindset. With that in mind, the investigators zeroed in on the real reason they had him there: the murder of Margaret Douglas. Gavin was quick to deny any involvement in Margaret's murder, and without solid evidence linking him to the crime, the police had no choice but to let him leave with his mother. However, before he left, they made a simple request: to examine his phone. Police assured his mother it was routine, saying they wanted to check if Gavin had been exploited by men like Paul. Reluctantly, she agreed, but what they found on Gavin's phone would change everything. The day that Margaret went missing, there was an increased police presence in the area. Gavin's mom texts him, "They're looking for someone." He responds, "Well, that's Wadsworth for you." Then he immediately Googles Wadsworth police reports Margaret Douglas. Margaret Douglas dead, Margaret Douglas, Wadsworth, Ohio, body found in Wadsworth, Ohio, latest update on Wadsworth murder, then deletes the search history. Searching Gavin's social accounts, police found one with the password, "I like kids." Digging deeper, they found a locked folder on his phone.
Hell no, to the no, 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 yeah, to the no.
Hell no.
Titled Dark, and its password was murder. Inside the folder, investigators found photos and videos taken on the night of Margaret's murder, Friday, April 6th. The first video showed Margaret asleep in her living room, recorded from inside the house, not from outside the window. She lay on the couch, clearly alive, briefly moving her hand to scratch her face. Then came a live photo of her lying on her side, her right eye and mouth open, with blood visible on her tongue and lips. She wasn't moving. A gloved hand gripped her neck, confirming she was already dead. Another live photo followed. This time, Margaret had been posed on her back in a sexual manner. Her nightgown was pulled open, her bra pushed up to her neck. A plastic-gloved hand was seen pressing against her exposed chest. The next few photos focused on her body, particularly her right breast. Then came a 16-second video that investigators could barely stomach. It showed Gavin using Margaret's lifeless hand, smeared with purple blackberry jam, to satisfy himself. Near the end of the clip, he
got sick issues. That's crazy. From the jam to the R word to the age. This is sickening.
Put his finger into her private part.
He degraded her by using her for sexual things and videotaping and taking pictures. He'd actually been in there with her for a while.
Between 2:09 a.m. and 4:10 a.m., Gavin remained in Margaret's house, committing these unspeakable acts of necrophilia. While he didn't fully assault her corpse in a traditional sense, the acts captured in the files left no doubt that this was still a necrophilia crime. Most of the images showed Margaret either nude or partially undressed, and in several frames, the same gloves Gavin was wearing that night were clearly visible. There was no video of the actual murder itself, likely because Gavin needed both hands free to strangle her. Medical examiners later concluded that it would have taken several minutes for Margaret to die. A slow, deliberate killing. She was 98 years old, having survived nearly a century of life's challenges, only to be brutally murdered by a teenager from down the street. And for what? So he could carry out twisted necrophilia fantasies and record the entire ordeal? Why? That's the question no one could truly answer. On April 16, 2018, police brought Gavin back in for questioning. This time, he couldn't deny what he had done.
And telling me about it doesn't give you much relief.
Just change the fact that it ruined my life.
So when she died, was she on the couch or on the floor? Were you on top of her then?
Kind of.
Like straddling her?
Yeah.
Did you use one hand or both?
Oh.
Did you squeeze it or push her against the floor or both?
Oh.
And you said you don't remember if she was bleeding at that point?
Cool. The only reason I can think of bleeding is when I put my hand over her mouth.
So when you were holding her hand over her mouth, you might have pushed too hard and maybe made a nosebleed.
Gavin gave a chilling account of the night he killed Margaret. He had never been inside Margaret's house before, until the night he killed her. He claimed he only went out that night to rob unlocked cars. But as he passed Margaret's house, he noticed her sleeping through the window. On impulse, he tried the back door. It was unlocked. Once inside, he began recording her as she slept on the couch. But as he crept closer, he accidentally bumped into a chair, waking Margaret. She immediately started screaming, and according to Gavin, he panicked. When he saw her reaching for her phone, he didn't know what else to do, so he strangled her.
Just run out.
Once she was dead, he admitted to stuffing her body into the closet and covering it with a pile of clothes to keep it hidden. The investigators listened patiently as Gavin tried to blame his actions on adrenaline and confusion, gently encouraging him to share more. Then, he made an even more disturbing admission. Gavin revealed that he had known Margaret before things in his life went downhill. He lived just around the corner from her, and, as a younger kid, had been friendly and helpful, often assisting neighbors, including Margaret, by shoveling their driveways in winter. But that past connection meant nothing. She was still a target. If the police hadn't caught Zach, and if Zach hadn't pointed them to Gavon, this horrifying crime might have gone unsolved. Gavon could have walked free, never facing justice for the brutal murder of an old lady. In the end, it seemed they had stopped a future serial killer before he could strike again.
Yeah, he definitely
Gavon was
gonna
arrested,
strike again.
and a search warrant was executed on his home. Inside, police discovered gloves matching the type found in Margaret's backyard. They also recovered Margaret's missing red wallet, which Gavon had taken as a twisted trophy. Alongside evidence linking him to Paul's carjacking, a stolen bottle of Hollister cologne, officers found something even more disturbing: a journal filled with chilling entries. Gavon had written biographies of notorious serial killers and detailed his own violent fantasies. One entry read, "I just want to fucking go off on someone and beat them until they're not breathing anymore. I honestly want to take someone's life. I want to know what it would feel like to stand over someone's dead body." Necrophilia is said to be rare, at least. We hope it is. But figuring out just how rare is difficult, because most people with such tendencies don't openly admit them. Still, it's common enough for experts to create 10 classifications of necrophiles. Class 1 includes those who don't seek corpses, but are aroused by fantasies of sexual encounters with one. They may even engage in role-play with willing partners pretending to be dead. Class 2 involves those who commit necrophilia due to emotional attachment, such as sleeping beside a dead body. The classifications grow darker as they progress, with Class 9 involving homicidal necrophiles, those who kill to have a corpse. The most extreme is Class 10, those exclusively attracted to corpses, who will kill repeatedly to obtain bodies and cannot experience arousal without one.
Yeah.
While necrophilia remains rare, studies show that those with such urges are often drawn to certain jobs, like hospital orderlies, morgue attendants, funeral home assistants, and cemetery workers. Of course, most people in those roles are just doing a job, but for a small group with dark tendencies, these environments are appealing.
Yeah, other motives.
That's why it raised eyebrows when police found out, a year before the murder, at 16 years old, Gavon applied for a job at a local funeral home. When that plan failed, he hunted for victims on the streets instead. At 17 years old, Gavon was charged as an adult with aggravated murder, aggravated burglary, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. To keep the focus on Margaret's case, the DA chose not to pursue charges related to the carjacking. Gavon was arraigned in June 2018, initially pleading not guilty. However, after his legal team's motions to suppress evidence from his phone were denied, he changed his plea to guilty in November 2018. Before sentencing, Gavon underwent psychological evaluations and was diagnosed with several disorders, including conduct disorder and sexual sadism disorder. His mother tried to defend him, blaming his actions on a new prescription for Zoloft, which Gavon had started taking in January 2018. However, investigators pointed out that many of the most disturbing entries in his journal had been written before he ever started the medication. The court didn't accept this explanation as a mitigating factor. At his sentencing hearing, Gavon addressed the court, repeating many of the same words he had used during his police interview. "I'm so sorry for what I did. I constantly live in bad shame because of it." Yet he never once referred to Margaret as a real person. He only spoke of it and what he'd done, showing little genuine remorse. The judge didn't believe his apology was sincere. Since he was 17 when he committed the murder, he wasn't eligible for the death penalty, but the court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, in 2021, Ohio passed Senate Bill 256, which banned life sentences without parole for juvenile offenders. This law means that Gavon can appeal for parole after serving 25 years, making him eligible for release as early as 2043. Margaret's family strongly opposes this possibility. Her great-niece wrote, "There are criminals who cannot be reformed. Gavon Ramsey is one of them. The law needs to be amended to recognize individuals like Gavon Ramsey, who have shown an irredeemable evil, a kind of evil that cannot be rehabilitated, and ensure that justice is served in accordance with the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling on juvenile life without parole." As it stands, Gavon will remain behind bars until at least 2043, when he may appeal for parole. But what do you think about this horrific case? Should someone like Gavin ever have the chance at freedom? Feel free to share in the comments. If there's a case you're interested in.
All right. This one was a crazy one, a weird one, sickening, young age, older woman, R word. It was so much going on. You guys jump in the comments. Let me know what you guys think of this one.